Good morning. This is the time and place for a zoning case hearing for October 24th, 2012. My name is Bradley Collin. I'll be conducting the hearing as a hearing officer. We have one case scheduled for today, and all the relevant exhibits are posted in the panel located directly behind me. If you wish to speak, please write your name and address on one of the speaker forms which are provided at the front door and submit it to our planning assistant. I'd like to inform everyone that the official proceedings of the planning hearing officer hearing are recorded on tape as part of the public record. Notification of this hearing was accomplished by public notices which were mailed to property owners located within 500 feet of the subject property, physically posted on the site in question, and placed in the local newspaper. The hearing will proceed as follows. I'll read the description of the application or request. I'll read the reports received, letters or communications, if there were any from interested parties. Case planner will make a brief overview of the case, giving analysis and make a recommendation. I'll then ask the applicant to come forward, stating both name and address, and be asked to present the case in a 15-minute time limit if needed. And then if there's anybody else that would like to speak in support or opposition to the project, you'll be given an opportunity to speak at that time. Lastly, the applicant will be given the opportunity to make any closing comments in response to testimony given by the preceding speakers, and that'll be a 5-minute time limit. And then the hearing will be closed from there. And the case will either be taken under submission or decision may be made today. The subject case that we have for today is an application for a standards variance application to increase the height of an existing 140-foot television radio broadcast monopole antenna to 160 feet on Flint Peak, located at 1048 Marengo Drive, also known as 3600 Linda Vista Road, and it's located in the ROS Residential Open Space Zone, described as portion of Lot B, Sycamore Canyon Track. Mr. Baxter, did we receive any comments from any of the...
I have not received any written or email comments from the public.
Okay. At this point, I'd like to ask our case planner to give us his presentation, and then we'll go forward from there.
All right, sir. As noted, case address that we have is 1048 Marengo Drive. It's an application to extend the height of an existing television radio broadcast monopole that was previously approved back in 2008 to be 140 feet at that time. The applicant is proposing to extend the height another 20 feet after doing some reconstruction of the existing pole to strengthen it. The existing property in the area is a very low-density residential open space. As you can look on our screen and also on our exhibits behind you, you can see that it's is open space. There's no residential development. I did not clock it when I drove out there, but it's at least a mile from Marengo, maybe even a little bit further. But it's a long drive by Glendale standards into open space area. The site is known as Flint Peak, and it is surrounded by this vacant open space, access through what we call the radio lateral dirt road. It's a fire road. You can get there either through Marengo, or you can also come through the back way via the Shoal Canyon landfill at the end of Glen Oaks Canyon. Currently, there are several radio and broadcast antennas out there and unoccupied communication buildings, and it's surrounded by a security fence. Our first records that I found show that the broadcast facility has been out there in some form or another initially since the 1950s. We had comments from several departments. The fire department had comments and these are conditions. In fact, I think all of them are listed as conditions, so maybe I'll go through it at that time because they're all pretty much listed as conditions. They're fairly standardized conditions, but the comments were from fire, building and safety, police, and information services. Now, the applicant states their purpose for increasing the monopole height is to install an auxiliary antenna as a backup to the main antenna, should it not be in service. And particularly during cases of emergency, they state that many of their listeners are Spanish-speaking and may not be able to understand the alternative English-speaking station should this antenna go dark. One of the concerns we have are 4 findings, so actually there's 4 concerns, and the 4 findings, one of them is the height, naturally, because that's where we're exceeding the height for that area. And for us, we looked at this and could see that it is a practical difficulty for the project because the lower antennas would not be able to provide the service to the public comparable to the other tower and monopole structures on the site. Even though this pole will be extended another 20 feet, the elevation of the ground level that it sits on is actually lower than the highest point of Flint Peak. And so it would be lower than the tower that's on the highest point of Flint Peak by about 5 feet. We feel that this property is also unique, which is the second finding, because this property has been developed since the 1950s pretty much solely for these types of antennas and communication buildings, and probably before many of the buildings in the area, the residential buildings, were constructed. Also, there's the Shoal Canyon, which is, I believe, in a southerly direction from this site, which is used as a landfill. Pretty much fills up that entire southerly view if you stand up on the peak. So that also gets into our third finding, which is would have a detrimental impact on the community. But we feel that these antennas have been there. They have part of the landscape. We feel that the additional 20 feet would not, for one antenna, a monopole antenna, would not have that significant of a visual impact, negative visual impact in the community. And again, this antenna or these antennas on this peak have been there in some form or another since the 50s. And so it's part of the landscape that the community has seen in this part of the city. One of the last finding that we looked at was the different land use elements to see whether this proposal would be inconsistent with them, and we feel that the land use element, which identifies this area, as I mentioned again, as this low-density residential open space, does allow broadcast and wireless facilities under the zoning code, which implements the land use element. These types of land uses have to be of a height to exceed the natural topography and the landscaping around it, so that they can broadcast unobstructed. So that's one reason why you need a high peak, and you need to be high enough to reach the population around you that you serve. Also, we noticed that in our open space and conservation element, the San Rafael Hills, where the Flint Peak is located, it was noted in the land use element that they have undergone a greater amount of development than other ridge lines in the city. Part of this, for instance, is the Shoal Canyon landfill to the south of it. So there's a whole lot of excavation that goes on, not at the upper reaches naturally, but at the lower areas, and then on the peak itself. Again, it's sort of redundant, but it's been going on in some form of development since the 1950s and continuously up to this day. And we feel that the other elements, the safety element, probably the opposite of being a detriment, since they'd be providing emergency information should there be a disaster, but also there's no staff facilities. Nobody has an office up there. These are unstaffed facilities. And also the circulation element. Both of these roads that access this site are blocked by locked gates. You have to have a permission to get into it, or you have some type of an agreement with the city. There's some forms that you fill out, and you get an agreement, and you can put your lock on and go up the road. So we feel that the applicant's request to extend the pole 20 feet should be approved, and that's what our recommendation is to the hearing officer. And the findings reflect that in the formal findings that are attached as part of your of the staff report, and the conditions of approval. There's 12 of them. When we go back and we look at what this is where it sort of ties in directly to the department comments from the fire department. There's a fire permit to access the radiolateral fire road. That's one of the conditions that is the standard one, just to be able to put your lock on the gate and get in and out. A fuel modification zone per city standards. Speaking with the fire department, that's also a fairly standardized one to make sure that the site that on your site and around your site that you control, and if you look at the property, see they have a large property around the Flint Peak itself, just make sure that the fuel modification issues that fire department is concerned about are addressed. There is a concern about complying with an article of the fire code for batteries. That's more of a discussion with the applicant about certain types of batteries related to these uses. For the most part, they say they want to put it in to have the discussion. And I don't even think we have that as a condition now. And then the address, the staff is working with Building and Safety Department, which establishes addresses for the city, and trying to come up with a different address than either one of these. So we'll see what happens. It may be the Marengo address, but there's also, if you'll note, we have up here on a public notice, I'm not sure we did it on the staff report, but on a public notice we also noted that the site is also known as 3600 Linda Vista, and that was prior to that subdivision where Marengo Drive was added. So they're trying to come up with an address that works for everybody on this, and there won't be any confusion. There won't be any AKAs involved. Then when we look at comments from the Building and Safety, there's the standardized permits, should there be permits required to install, to do some reconstruction of the existing pole, to strengthen it and adding the 20-foot height. If a permit's required, they would be the ones working with the building, with the applicant for building code standards. The police department noted that they make routine flights over the site for security purposes on a regular basis, many times at night, and they said that if they're extending the height, they want to make sure there's a red light on top of the pole so that there's not going to be any conflicts with them flying at certain elevations. And then the Information Services Administrator, the Wireless Administrator from the Information Service Division submitted a comment about a certification for the increased height to comply with the Federal Communication Commission regulation. So that summarizes my comments, and glad to answer questions if you have any.
I have one question. What is the allowed height for this zone?
It's 15 feet for an accessory structure.
Are we considering these antennas accessory structures?
Well,
or
it's a
different?
monopole or a pole type structure, which is an accessory.
Okay. Thank you.
It's under the category of accessory use.
I'm going to go ahead and open the public hearing. I have 2 speaker cards. One, I understand, is going to be the main presenter. That's Mr. Tom Davis. And then I have another one from Kurt Wilkinson, if there's questions. Good morning.
Good morning.
Please state your name and address for the record.
My name is Tom Davis with Davis Consulting Services located at 9672 Bryn Mawr Drive, Villa Park, California. I'm serving as the consultant carrying the package through the City of Glendale Planning Department to seek a variance for additional height to the monopole, which is the subject of this application. Just a little bit further background. The primary goal of using Flint Peak is for auxiliary power in case of natural disaster or emergencies, where the majority of the primary broadcasting is done at Mount Wilson. And you might have remembered the station fire that was, a year or two ago, caused great concern and issues at Mount Wilson. And that means the utility of Flint Peak is even more important. The heightening of the subject monopole by 20 feet is going to allow us to accommodate to install an auxiliary antenna for Univision. Univision is the primary Spanish-speaking broadcast station in Southern California, and they wish to have their auxiliary antenna broadcasting capabilities here at Flint Peak. So that's the gist of us going through this process. Mr. Baxter mentioned that the Flint Peak facilities have been here since the 1950s. That is correct. That is consistent with the research that I've done. I might mention, though, that the earliest use or tenant on the property that we know of is the City of Glendale, who has an antenna there, which predates the 50s, and we think that maybe that was initially established in 1947 or 1948. So having said that, we have read the staff report. We have reviewed the findings. I can repeat those to whatever extent you wish me to do. We have read the conditions. We agree to the conditions. They are all very straightforward and all very doable. We're here to answer questions. I have representatives here of the applicant, which is Richland Tower. Richland Tower owns the property and the facilities, and we have representatives of Univision, who will be the tenant installing the additional antenna on top of the heightened monopole.
Okay, if you could read through the findings, that would be great.
Okay.
Would it be their findings or our findings?
He went through the findings.
Are they basically the same as what staff read?
Yes.
Okay. I do have a question about the height that we're asking for. With the tower that's out there now, and I don't know if this is something you can answer or one of the other members of your team, can Univision co-locate on the existing tower? Notwithstanding, I know the requirement for strengthening it, but is there a way that Univision would be able to co-locate on the existing height of the tower that's there? Or I'll let you answer that.
Okay. Well, it's interesting. That was one of the first questions that was posed to us by city staff. And the answer is that the capacity of the existing antennas that are there, monopoles or otherwise, they're at full capacity. The only reason that we're going through the cost of increasing the height of the subject monopole is to add a little bit more capacity for this particular antenna. So the answer is we evaluated the possibility before submitting this application of co-loading this new antenna onto one of the other structures there, and there just wasn't capacity.
Okay. And then are we foreseeing that, and I don't know if this is a fair assumption, but the 20 feet that's being added, would that solely be for Univision, or will there be potentially other carriers or stations that would be able to also join with that 20 feet?
Right now, I understand, and we can have gentlemen from Richland Towers answer that more directly if needed, but Univision will be the primary tenant of that additional height. That doesn't mean that over time that might change. Kurt or Tony, do you want to address that?
Hi,
Please state your-
Kurt Wilkinson, Richland Towers, Tampa, Florida. In answer to your question, the 20 feet was the minimum physical space that we needed for the Univision antenna. So physically, it would be impossible to put another antenna at that location.
Do you foresee in the future, and I don't know how high these things potentially will grow to, depending on the need, I guess, but do you foresee other stations wanting to also locate on the same tower, and is 20 feet going to accommodate that, or are you then looking at another variance in the future?
It would not. I couldn't predict the future. This solely would satisfy the Univision.
Requirements to be able to broadcast.
That help? Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And then there's no changes to the proposed building that's out there now. I've noticed on the floor plan that there's several different stations that are occupying that building. I assume are using that tower. Is there any proposed expansion to any of that, or is this solely just the tower?
This application is solely for the tower. Again, city staff asked that question at our pre-app meeting. The only thing that will be done to the building will be rearrangement of partitions internal to allow for a new transmission equipment to be installed. And we included in our application a figure that shows a photograph of what a typical electrical equipment bank looks like. It's just a big metal box that has a lot of electric stuff inside. That's my technical understanding of it.
Okay, that's fine. So we're not adding to the dimensions of it, we're not adding to the height of it?
That's correct.
Okay. So then solely just talking about the extra 20 feet being added to the monopole?
Well, and also prior to be fair and accurate, prior to installing the additional 20 feet in our application, we mentioned that we are going to take off the existing 20 feet and replace it with a newer, more sturdy, structurally sturdy piece to replace that 20 feet. And once that is replaced, then we're going to add another 20 feet onto that. So the height is only going to be increased by 20 feet, but the current top 20 feet is going to be replaced with a more physically structural piece of monopole.
Okay, and then I assume during the plan check process, they'll review the whole tower to make sure that the tower itself is capable of withstanding the additional 20 feet that's being
Exactly. That is one of the most critical elements of the whole process as we go through the city departments for plan check, building permits, is the structural calculations that support the additional height.
Okay. I had one question, just to make sure real quick. Nobody else wishes to speak on this? Okay, one last question for you, Mr. Davis.
Yes.
I was going through this could also be addressed by staff, the conditions of approval. Condition number 8 requires design review board approval shall be obtained prior to the issuance of a building permit. And I'm wondering if we should, thinking that we should modify that to say the design review board approval or exemption.
Yes. Okay, that's a good point.
So there's a possibility maybe that this could be exempted from design review board. I mean, we won't be able to review it, but I'd like to at least have that flexibility added to the condition that if there is a way to exempt it, that you don't have to go through the design review board process.
We would very much appreciate that amendment to Condition 8. We actually brought that to Mr. Baxter's attention. We talked about it. We were hoping that we would have an opportunity to tweak that a little bit, because we really don't think that that is something that we would typically go through.
Okay. Okay, so to reiterate, you agree with the findings as established by staff, and with that one condition modification to include either approval or exception, you're comfortable with the conditions of approval?
We concur to the conditions of approval as proposed in the staff report.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead, seeing that there's no one else wanting to speak on the case. I'm going to close the hearing. And based on the findings recommended by staff, the facts and information presented at the hearing, and other applicable departments' input, which were included as conditions of approval, bless you, with the one change to condition number 8 to add in that the project could possibly be exempted from design review board, add that flexibility, I'm going to approve the subject variance request. And after the hearing, the decision will be prepared in writing, will be in the form sent to the applicant and to all persons who responded to the public notice, either by speaking at this hearing or by submitting written responses and provided their name and mailing address. The date on the decision will be the date appearing on the letter. Under the appeals provision, Title 30, Chapter 30.62 of the Glendale Municipal Code, the decision may be appealed to the Planning Commission within 15 days of the date of the decision. Anyone wishing to appeal may obtain forms and brochures on the procedures from the Building and Safety Section, Permit Service Center, located on this floor. The hearing is now officially closed. I'd like to thank everybody for coming, and make sure you work with staff before you're ready to submit for plan check, assuming there's no appeals. And it is 10:11 on October 24th. Again, thank you everyone for coming out to the hearing.